Hello and a very good evening to everybody joining us today. My name is Simrit and I work as a research associate with Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in for today's webinar on facilitating Eco Niwas Samhita implementation in affordable housing, which is being hosted by Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy in collaboration with Global Buildings Performance Network. In today's session, we'll have the launch of the report on policy review for facilitating the implementation of ENS, followed by a comprehensive discussion on the importance of energy efficiency and thermal comfort in affordable housing. And some of the key discussion points that we aim to cover in today's discussion include, firstly, the incorporation of ENS in urban local bodies' urban development plans, smart city vision, building bylaws, and other legislative processes. Secondly, we'll be discussing the need for incorporation of energy efficiency and thermal comfort parameters in PMAY-U. And lastly, we'll discuss the role of energy efficiency and thermal comfort in enhancing the livability and affordability of affordable housing. We hope to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So I would encourage all the participants to submit your questions in the Q&A window that you see on your screens. And we'll get to that at the very end of the webinar. Before I invite our first speaker, we actually have a question for our audience, which should now be coming up on your screen. So the question is that what, according to you, is the total housing deficit in India? You have 4 options in front of you, and I would encourage everybody to please submit your responses. I'll give this another 10 seconds before I close it. Okay. So here's the responses that we've got. 52% of the participants believe that it's option D, which is actually correct. The housing shortage in India is estimated at 18 million households. And this shortage is mostly prominent within the economically weaker sections and the lower income groups. To talk more about the housing shortage in India, I will now request Dr. Peter Graham, who is the Executive Director of GBPN, to give the welcome address. Dr. Graham, I would also request you to talk about the GBPN initiative in India and how it intends to address one of India's most pressing challenges through the adoption of energy efficient policies for buildings. So over to you, Dr. Graham.
Thank you, Simrat. I'll just share my screen here. So we should be able to see, just tell me if you can see my slides.
Yes, here. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's not good, is it? Just one moment. Let me just show this other screen here. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint slides now?
Yes.
How does that? That's great. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining the launch of this great report, Policy Strategy to Decarbonise the Building Sector in the Implementation of the Eco Niwas Samhita in Affordable Housing. I'd like to really thank the report authors, first of all, Anyukriti, Tarun, and Dr. Satish Kumar of AEEE for their hard work in bringing this report to fruition and for organising this launch and this, what I'm sure will be a fascinating panel discussion today. I'd also like to thank the expert reviewers, including Professor Rajan Rawal of CEPT and Jeswin Yogaratnam, who is the Strategic Engagement and Policy Program Manager at GBPN, for all the hard work in bringing this report to us today. I am the Executive Director of the Global Buildings Performance Network, and the GBPN is a global network of local, trusted building sector policy experts, and we work to support governments and industry to decarbonise the building sector. We have more than 50 experts in 22 countries, and we're honoured to count AEEE and Dr. Satish Kumar, along with CEPT University, as our local expert partners in India. Over the past decade, we've worked on policy best practices to help reform policies in the EU, in China, in the USA and India. And since 2019, we've shifted focus to Southeast Asia and India, which collectively are experiencing the fastest growth in new construction and associated energy use and of course related greenhouse gas emissions. We're therefore particularly focused on support for the development and implementation of policies and regulations that can reduce energy demand and emissions from the housing market, which is the least well-regulated market across the region. Our overall policy strategy is called the Policy Strategy for Decarbonising Buildings in Asia, and it's designed to be adapted to local priorities. Where no residential energy policies or regulations currently exist, we engage local experts and facilitate the development and endorsement of policy development plans. And you can see on the slide here some of our great experts and this policy cycle, which is the mode with which we engage in local markets. And the first step here is indeed policy planning. This is where we're working in Indonesia, for example. We have established a program we call Hidup, which means alive in Bahasa Indonesia, which is a local stakeholder-led initiative to develop a fundable policy adoption plan for achieving zero emissions housing in Indonesia by 2030. Now, the plan is nearing its completion this year, and next year we'll move to pilot implementation in cities so that we can see residential energy efficiency policies adapted and working with local government experts and industry. And one of the things that we found really is that engaging in local markets and generating a really good understanding of how the building sector and how regulation works in local markets is essential. So we're working very much from the bottom up to develop local understandings and bring international best practices to the fore to help move policy forward in local settings. And that's really what we're aiming to do also in India. So once policies and regulations are written, they need to be adopted and mandated. And this normally happens with state governments, and then they need to be effectively implemented at a local level. This is where we aim to provide support in India. With the ENS launched, it's key that it be adopted and effectively implemented. The report being launched today is the outcome of the first phase of this engagement. And as you know, there is a lot of activity in India around ENS development and implementation. So GBPN was very keen to be guided to where our support could have the greatest impact. And so the research which for this report identified the critical need to focus on affordable housing as a market segment, which, as the report points out, represents 95% of demand in urban India. So this project really aimed to facilitate the implementation of the ENS in affordable housing, and beginning as we have, as is our style, at a local level, working in the city of Ahmedabad. And looking at where the GBPN could play a great role, an important role, a value-added role in the very active markets of India when it comes to housing, and also there's with a lot of the activities around ENS on the ground, guided by AEEE, the objective of this project was to develop complementary and simultaneous top-down and bottom-up approaches to facilitate the implementation of ENS. So to complement a lot of the top-down work which is going on, engaging with urban local bodies to help facilitate that bottom-up implementation. And then, in order to do that, provide technical support to ULBs to facilitate the adoption and enforcement compliance of the ENS. And to do it in a way which creates toolkits and a replicable implementation framework for the affordable housing sector overall, so that we could scale up over time. So meeting this demand for affordable housing obviously has been a priority for the Indian government. But as the report outlines, the speed of delivery and keeping costs low has been prioritised over ensuring energy and material efficiency, quality of life and thermal comfort for occupants. This leaves open the risk of locking in higher energy demand and associated greenhouse gas emissions as residents purchase air conditioners potentially for the first time to compensate for building design and construction that does not support passive cooling or low energy comfort. Rising greenhouse gas emissions and increasing urban density work together to increase climate and urban heating, which disproportionately increases the vulnerability of the urban poor to climate change impacts such as heat waves. More fundamentally, though, beyond emissions themselves, we regard access to affordable and sustainable housing as a human right. Being able to live in a thermally comfortable home should not be a privilege. It is a right. It is a core component of providing adequate shelter. As the report states, adequate shelter is defined as something more than just a roof over one's head. It means having access to adequate privacy, space, security, physical accessibility, adequate lighting, heating and ventilation, adequate basic infrastructure, all of which are to be made available at an affordable cost. Energy efficient buildings provide thermal comfort and adequate shelter, which improves people's health and well-being. This is especially important as we suffer and simultaneously seek refuge from this horrible pandemic. It's linked to improved productivity, lower risk of non-communicable diseases, reduced household energy costs, and increasing prosperity for families. And families are the foundation of our economies. Making sustainable housing available to everyone is the fundamental role of mandatory building codes. By setting and enforcing minimum mandatory performance requirements for energy efficiency and thermal performance of affordable housing, governments can protect the health, well-being and economic opportunities of the majority of their citizens. Mandatory regulations also establish a level playing field for investors and industry to operate in. Well-implemented regulations, when combined in policy packages that also offer incentives, training and rating schemes, help drive demand for higher performing buildings, support innovation and stimulate economic recovery and growth. So this is really where the vision of GBPN comes in, and where we're interacting with AEEE and other partners in India to try and bring our insights in policy reform and people-centered policy reform to help establish ground for really meeting this fundamental human right for thermal comfort. Evidence from recent research by GBPN for the United Nations Environment Programme demonstrates that countries that make long-term commitments to implementing ambitious policy plans create significant multiple benefits, including GDP growth, jobs, better household savings and health. These packages of ambitious building codes, mandatorily enforced, plus rating and disclosure policies to help support the actual compliant operation of buildings, and appliance standards and energy efficiency obligations, when integrated well and adapted to local market conditions, really do produce multiple benefits and great long-term benefits to economies and to societies. The key to driving that forward is having ambitious performance targets for new building and also for renovation. And we like to see targets set towards net zero over time. GBPN's experience looking at policy implementation best practices in many countries over the past decade has taught us that these outcomes are often hard-won, but are achievable if there is an emphasis on beginning to implement regulations in sectors that provide scale, such as affordable housing, and if there is an emphasis on working at the local market level, on administrative processes, design and construction practices, and tracking costs and benefits over the long term. Policy design, implementation and reform needs people-centered support and should be approached as action learning and continual improvement. And this slide shows the policy strategy theory of change that we generally operate under, where we see the sticks and the carrots and the tambourines, or the regulations, the incentives and the voluntary programs and capacity building mechanisms working together to increase the number of buildings which are first of all compliant with minimum performance requirements, and then exceed those requirements so that regulators can move the minimum performance requirements forward over time. And of course, every time we take action, we can learn. And so the GBPN provides knowledge platforms and links the local experts through these global knowledge sharing infrastructure so that we can accelerate that kind of market transformation. So this is what GBPN is aiming to support in India going forward. We've appointed Gautam Nagar as our senior advisor in India. So we have a focal point now to help develop opportunities for further collaboration, especially in supporting ENS adoption and implementation at the local level with ULBs and PMAYU developers. This report represents the culmination of work on phase 1 and identifies opportunities for incorporation of ENS in ULBs, urban development plans, smart city vision, building bylaws and other legislative processes. We are really delighted to see this first step achieved, and we're looking forward to phase 2, where we take the findings of this report and develop technical assistance for code implementation through guidelines, including implementable recommendations for incorporating ENS into state level regulations and standards. GBPN's role in this process is really to empower local experts by connecting them with peers around the world to share policy insights and best practices, and then assist. The launch of this report is very much an important first step. So with that, I'd like to thank again AEEE for putting this together for us and for hosting this webinar. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more of the detail of the findings in the upcoming presentations, and also learning more about the context and practicalities of implementing ENS in affordable housing from our esteemed panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, for your remarks and highlighting the vision of GBPN and its work in India on building energy performance policy. I think you've made a very important point by highlighting the imperative need for sustainable and comfortable housing, as well as equity in access, which is, I think, fundamental to ensure that India realizes its development and economic goals, which have become especially important in the current times. So thank you for your remarkable insights. And you also alluded to the facilitation of ENS at local levels, and the report talks about that. But before we get to that, we have another question for our audience here. All right. So the question is that what is the target and duration set for the PMAYU mission? Requesting everybody to please submit your responses.
Simrat, this is Prasad. Are the panelists also to respond?
No, so this is just for the participants, Prasad.
Thank you.
The audience joining us, yeah. Okay, so I'll close this now. All right, so here are the results. So the correct answer is actually option D, which 46% of the participants also responded. So the urban branch of the PMAY scheme aims at building 12 million houses during 2015 to 2022. All right, thank you for submitting your responses, everybody. So to talk more about the PMAY vision, I will now invite my colleagues, Anukriti Pathak and Tarun Garg, who are also the authors of this report, and they'll present their findings on formulating a policy strategy for decarbonizing the building sector through facilitating the implementation of Eco Niwas Samhita and affordable housing. So over to you, Anukriti and Tarun.
Okay. Thank you, Simrat, for the introduction. Am I audible, Simrat?
Yes, Tarun, you are.
Okay. So thank you, Simrat, for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Peter, for a very good presentation on GBPN mission, vision, and the kind of work you're planning to do across the world, and your focus for India as well. So in this presentation, as Dr. Peter mentioned, and Simrat also highlighted, we will talk about some of the key findings we have gathered during the phase 1 of the project. And moving forward, we will also talk about phase 2, in which we will highlight what kind of work we are planning. And hopefully, in the panel discussion with Dr. Satish as moderator, we will get good insights which we can further use for tweaking our work or modifying the next phase. Next slide. So the project, if we talk about project objectives and contribution, as Dr. Peter highlighted, so there are 3 key objectives of the project. One is to facilitate the implementation of ENS by developing a complementary top-down and bottom-up approach, focusing from center to state and then cities as well. Technical assistance to urban local bodies for the implementation of Eco Niwas Samhita, ENS, and to develop an implementation framework that can be replicated within the state, across different ULBs, and then across different states as well. And if we talk about the key contributions, because there are a lot of work happening in and around the affordable housing sector. So one of the key contribution of this report is to understand the implementation mechanism, including the regulatory mechanisms, governance structure of PMAY urban, and how ENS can be integrated in the current setup. And the report also comprehends and advocates a life cycle approach, considering the initial and recurring expenses towards defining the affordability. I think you will find during the presentation and in the report as well, there are good insights on how affordability has been defined and what we need to do in terms of ensuring energy efficiency becomes a part of it. And who can benefit? Definitely, along with the line ministries like Ministry of Housing, Ministry of Power, Ministry of Environment, attached departments like National Institute of Urban Affairs, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Town Country Planning. There are state level departments which will definitely benefit from this report. One of the first steps undertaken by the team was to understand the best practices or the learnings from the ECBC implementation that can be replicated for ENS implementation as well. And if you see the box highlighted with green color, indicates institutional structure and regulatory mechanisms. For implementation of any policy, the understanding of institutional structure, which includes center, state, and city level, administrative process, mechanism, policies, roles and responsibility of different stakeholders becomes very important for ensuring successful implementation or effective implementation. And then also at city level or at state level, it is very important to understand the regulatory mechanisms, like if you have a policy at the central level, then it's amendment at the city level or at the state level, then notification process, preparedness of the state or the city once the code is notified or once the policy is notified, how much prepared we are in terms of whether we have the capacity of professionals to ensure the support, whether we have the materials, whether we have the technologies. So I think those kind of pertinent questions will become very important for ensuring the implementation of any policy, which was seen during the ECBC. And I think we have seen and we have observed during this phase that these two elements will become very critical for ENS implementation. We have not looked at the market or training and capacity at this stage. Hopefully, as we move forward, we will look at market mechanisms as well as training and capacity building. Next. In terms of overall approach followed for this project, as I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, so we have definitely looked at the lessons learned during the ECBC implementation. Then we have also looked at how affordability has been defined and how energy efficiency can be integrated, or what has been done from energy efficiency point of view and ENS point of view. And then last but not the least, understanding the entire PMAY framework, implementation framework, right from the center to the state and then to the city, and then where we have the possibility of integrating Eco Niwas Samhita in the entire process. And due to this pandemic situation we have, the focus or the methodology which we have adopted in this phase is mainly relied upon the literature review and stakeholder interactions. Although we have managed to interact stakeholders at cities level, but I would not say it is 100% complete. So maybe moving forward, we'll have more interactions at the city level as well. Coming to the definition of affordability, if you go to the next slide. If you look at this slide in India, as per RBI, the prime factors used to determine the affordability of a dwelling unit are the household income level. So if you see column 1, which is numeric 1, so you will find income range, then EMI percentage of monthly income, and then the dwelling unit size. However, any recurring expense, which includes your fuel bill, it could be cooking expense, it could be your electricity bill, any operation maintenance expense, are not considered in the overall definition of affordability. So I think this is again gives us some indication that how energy efficiency has been addressed in affordability definition. Now, if you look at this slide, and if you see how Deepak Parekh committee has defined affordability, which is not talking about the quantity but also quality of the housing unit. It indicated towards the various cost components, including initial cost and recurring cost. Recurring cost will include definitely something like fuel expenses, water expenses, operation maintenance expense, repair expense, all those things that I mentioned in this slide as well. And I think for ensuring implementation of energy efficiency in affordable housing, it would be absolutely important to include or to look at the recurring expense as part of the overall affordability definition, because that is how we can ensure integration of energy efficiency right at the beginning of the, I would say, concept of affordable housing. Now, if you look at housing shortage, condition and construction, so as per Government of India, 95% of housing demand in urban India is from lower income category group, which is LIG, and 5% is from MIG and HIG. And housing shortage is around 18.78 million, out of which around 12 millions will be captured under PMAY urban. And if you look at the floor area, I think these numbers are again indicates that we need to do something about energy efficiency or thermal comfort. It will increase from 15.3 billion meters square to 21.9 billion meters square by 2027. And last but not the least, I think the sector, because in this pandemic, we are also looking at the energy efficiency is definitely important, but what about the sector contribution to the livelihood, to the jobs and other socio-economic aspects? So as of October 2020, PMAY urban has led to around 19.4 million direct and indirect jobs. So I think this again highlights the importance of the sector we are looking at, and energy efficiency will further only enhance the livability or the socio-economic aspect. Now, looking at the overall status, I think this slide is very important. I'll touch upon the implementation of ENS and its potential in the overall affordable housing sector. So looking at the overall status of PMAY till October 2020, it is quite clear that around 11.2 million houses have been planned under PMAY, and out of which around 10.7 million units have already been sanctioned. And if you look at this number, 10.7 million, out of around 68% of the sanctioned units have already been grounded, and the remaining 38% are completed. So this will give you some idea about the potential of, if we have to think about implementing energy efficiency, then currently with this 10.79 million units, we have 68% number which we can think about implementing energy efficiency. And rest of the units, which are around 0.43 million, which are not being sanctioned, I think definitely there is a scope of implementing ENS in the overall affordable housing sector. Now, talking about the construction of dwelling units under different verticals of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, if you look at the right pie chart, you will find housing under BLC is around 63% of the total units which are being sanctioned right now, and 24% under AHP, Affordable Housing in Partnership, 11% under Credit Linked Subsidy Scheme, and 4% under ISSR, Institute Slum Rehabilitation. Now, considering the fact, so this again becomes very important for all of us to understand, the ANS is applicable at the center or at Bureau level, Bureau of Energy Efficiency level. ANS applicability is for only those, I would say, plots which are having area of 500 meters square and above. And it is applicable in mass housing projects under AHP, ISSR, and CLSS, which constitutes around 40% of the entire affordable housing under PMAY. So I think you will get some sort of idea that if you are looking at ENS implementation, then 40% of the housing units will be eligible for ENS implementation. However, principles of ENS can definitely be applied under BLC or under any category of housing. Now, if you look at the benefits of energy efficiency or Eco Niwas Samhita and affordable housing, definitely, as we have all been hearing a lot and reading a lot and witnessing also a lot, that occupants' productivity, health is also very important. And for that, thermal comfort becomes very important. And to achieve thermal comfort, we definitely would consume energy, and then how energy can be reduced. So ENS will definitely provide one of the I would say policy mechanism where energy efficiency and thermal comfort can both be integrated in a comprehensive manner. And as per Bureau of Energy Efficiency, ENS compliant buildings can reduce the electricity bill up to 20%. That is around 125 billion units of electricity, and it is equivalent to 100 million tons of CO2. Now I would request my colleague Anupriti to share the findings of our work in Gujarat.
Thank you so much, Tarun. To implement Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana at a state level, the state government is supposed to undertake certain regulatory reforms. These are the reforms on the screen which the government of Gujarat has undertaken to implement the policy in the state. For example, there has been the removal of non-agricultural land permission from the residential zone. They have earmarked land for affordable housing in the master plan itself, and they are promoting single window and time-bound clearance construction permits approval system. They have also amended certain pre-approved building design system. This practice is somewhat becoming popular all across the country. And there is also a provision of enhanced FAR TDR to the developer who is willing to provide affordable housing. Moving on, Since housing in India is a state subject, we looked into the other policies as well to look at the replicability potential of Eco Niwas Samhita at the state level. We figured that there are multiple policies in Gujarat, as would be in the rest of the states of India, who are also delivering affordable housing. On the top, you see the current status of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana implementation in Gujarat. And on the bottom of the slide, you see the other policies and schemes that the government in Gujarat has implemented to provide affordable housing to the citizens there. In order to draw parallels between the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana implementation process and to see where Eco Niwas Samhita can be fitted within it, we try to lay down the governance structure at all the 3 stages of governance in India. So we figured that within the PMAYU implementation structure, the urban local body is supposed to take a gauge of the local situation and prepare the housing for all demand assessment. Also the detailed project report, and ultimately when the funds come down back to it, they talk about releasing the tender for construction. The state government has somewhat has got a sanctioning and monitoring committee, that is SLSMC, and they have some mandatory regulatory reforms, which I explained in the previous slide, which facilitate and smoothen the overall transaction of the policy. The center government more or less restricts its role to random checks and the disbursement of funds itself. What we propose here is from our understanding that at each of the levels, how ENS can be compliant with the overall sanctioning and implementation process of PMAYU. So we propose that the ENS parameters in building bylaws and construction approval processes can happen at the urban local body level. The state government can do sort of compliance check, random compliance check, not of all projects, and then it can also talk about ENS compliant design prototypes and a material directory. The central government, as taking a lead in the overall process, can talk about ENS parameters within the mission guidelines itself and incorporate them within the existing technological submission within the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. Moving on, we try to dig deeper within the urban governance system of Gujarat, seeing exactly how housing is being delivered, like what are the various institutions involved or departments involved in it. So housing in India or anywhere else in the world is majorly a function of 2 major components, which is one is policy and the other is finance. So here you see the delivery mechanism of how the decision making and the finance flow happens. So the one highlighted in mustard, that is the Affordable Housing Mission, is the nodal agency for the delivery of affordable housing in Gujarat, and it is also responsible for delivering the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. The services and the permission and the land allocation is under the jurisdiction of the ULBs, which in this case are ODA, which is Ahmedabad Urban Development Authority, and Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. There is also the Town Planning and Valuation Department, which is responsible for making the overall master plan of the city. So this is how, and then everything ultimately manifests on the landowner, who's responsible for building and profit-making business within the housing delivery itself. By laying down this process, we then jumped up to what exactly is happening in Ahmedabad. So to begin with, we figured that Ahmedabad is one of the first cities in India which has earmarked an area of 76 square kilometers for affordable housing itself. So the area is sort of forms a ring around between the ODA and the AMC boundaries. And this particular area has an FSI of 0.9. Moving on, then what we started doing was that once, okay, you got the land, you need to have a certain level of building compliance process as well. So during the construction permit process that we dissected of AMC, we figured that the entire process could be divided in three phases, which is pre-construction, during construction, and after completion of construction phase. So each of these phases had certain preset regulations and steps involved, which were like, so during the preset, you have to come up with all the NOCs from different departments, which to encourage single window clearance, AMC facilitates itself. During construction, there are certain spot checks that AMC undertakes. And after completion, there is a occupancy certification issued by AMC to the occupants or the owners. So we propose that within this process, if we want to talk about ENS compliance, We can talk about self-certification or certification by any competent authority at the stage of pre-construction, along with the other NOCs and other documentation that an applicant is supposed to provide. During construction, there can be spot checks, which would ensure compliance of whatever was declared in the self-certification or the compliance certificate provided during the pre-construction phase. And after construction, there could be a post-occupancy reporting and sort of a benchmarking exercise, which will not only promote energy efficiency in these affordable housing, but also would set a culture of larger data disclosure and energy efficiency in a city level or a country level as a whole. We then dwell deeper into what are the existing bylaws that regulate a building construction process in Ahmedabad. We figured that the general development controls and regulations talk about FSI or FAR, building heights, internal open spaces, margins and setbacks, the ground coverage, and the internal open spaces. As per the ENS compliant process, these are the 4 clauses which could be incorporated within the GDCR and making the building energy efficient and thermally comfortable for its occupants. These 4 figures are window to floor ratio, visible light transmittance, and thermal transmittance of the roof, and residential envelope transmittance value. These overall regulate the light and the temperature within the building itself. So moving towards the conclusions and the key takeaways from the report. So one of the biggest challenges for us was to define affordability. We dwell deeper into defining affordability, which Tarun also presented in the previous slides. We looked at affordability more from the perspective of a life cycle approach. Then one of the challenges that we faced during the entire process was the lack of availability of data on residential energy consumption. Though we did figure out some data from NSSO and other civil society organizations like CW, Prayas, or CPR, but we could not find a representative holistic sample which could be taken as a income group wise categorization of electricity consumption across the country. The third point which I want to highlight here, that within PMAY itself, there are multiple ways in which housing delivery happens. So one size fits all approach of the code will not be feasible. We need to think of more innovative ways and talk about in many more modules where we can talk about implementation of ENS within the PMAYU itself. The fourth point, which Tarun also highlighted from as a learning from the ECBC implementation process, is that capacity building is a very, very important prospect when it comes to implementation of a certain policy. So that exercise needs to be strengthened at the ULB level. The last clause is that we saw earlier in the presentation that 63% of the total housing built under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is beneficiary-led construction. And in very architectural term, we call it self-built incremental housing units. So to facilitate code implementation within that, from the perspective of increasing energy efficiency and thermal comfort, there needs to be some level of very optimized approach that needs to come in place within it. The way forward for the project, which we see here, which Dr. Peter mentioned in his presentation, is that we are now heading into the phase 2 of the project, where we aim to facilitate adoption, enforcement, and compliance of the code at the level of the ULB through formulating a toolkit or a handbook. So the toolkit would mainly be divided into 4 major segments that would focus on adoption, compliance, enforcement, and assessing overall the preparedness of the state, and also suggesting some strategies which the state can undertake. The report is available on the AEEE website. I would request all of you to please go through it and please get back to us with your feedback and comments and suggestions. It would really strengthen our work in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anukriti and Tarun, for that insightful presentation and underscoring the potential of ENS in affordable housing. And thank you for taking us through the interesting findings and learnings of this report. I would also like to reiterate what Anukriti said, that you can find this report on AEEE's website if you want to read more on that. Before we get to the panel discussion for today, we have another question for our audience, which should be now coming up on your screen. Okay, so the question is, ENS can be applied in which all verticals of PMUIU? Requesting everybody to please submit your responses. Okay, so I'll close this now. Okay, so here are the results. The correct answer is all of the above. So the principles of ENS with slight modifications can be replicated in any dwelling unit. All right, thank you. So now we move on to the panel discussion for today. We have with us a very exciting panel. We have Mr. Harpal Dev, who is the Assistant Town and Country Planner from Ministry of Urban Development. Then we have Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajsekar from National Institute of Urban Affairs, Mr. Prasad Vaidya, who's the Director of Solar Decathlon India, Dr. Sameer Mathur, who is the Director of Green Tech Knowledge Solutions, and Dr. Purushottam Sunita, who is the Head of Sustainability at Mahindra Life Space Developers Limited. Thank you to each one of you for joining today's discussion. I will now kindly request Dr. Satish Kumar, who is the President and Executive Director at AEEE, to kindly take the chair and moderate this session. So over to you, Dr. Satish.
Hey, hi. Thanks, Simrat, for the introduction. I would like to take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all the esteemed panelists who have taken time out to attend this webinar and share their views and perspectives. We are really excited to have you on the panel and looking forward to hearing from you. I also want to extend our thanks to GBPN, the Global Building Performance Network, and to both Dr. Peter Graham and to Jasmine Yogaratnam for working with AEEE and CEPT University in on this project and giving us an opportunity to work on this project. And lastly, I would like to thank my colleagues, both Tarun Garg and Anukriti, for working on this report and making this presentation. Also, my thanks to Professor Rajan Rawal of CEPT University. I don't know if Rajan is on this webinar or not, but I wish this webinar would have taken place a day later. I probably would have the honor of addressing him as Dr. Rajan Rawal, because I know Professor Rajan Rawal is defending his PhD tomorrow. And I think not expecting any glitches. I think he will be, I think, Dr. Rajan Rawal from tomorrow. So anyway, I think, as I said, I'm very, very excited to have such an eminent group of experts with me. You all have gone through or listened to the presentation that has been made. And some of you, I know some of you, I'm really looking forward to knowing a little better during this panel discussion and interaction. And I'll just say that maybe just to set some ground rules and expectations, I'll request everybody to make 2 interventions, and maybe the first intervention can be about 3 minutes long. So we have 5 people, and you can get an opportunity to speak for about 3 minutes. That will give us about 15 minutes. And then I will also direct some questions again to specific panelists, and then you can probably respond to that in about 1.5 to 2 minutes. So I'm hoping that the entire first round of interactions should not exceed about maybe 40 minutes total, give and take. And then we will open it up for some of the questions that we will be receiving from the audience. I see about 90 people who are listening to this webinar, and we have asked them to submit their questions through the chat box, and the AEEE team will be forwarding some of these questions to me, and then I will be posing those questions to our esteemed panel. So Let me start by saying that this particular panel discussion is not so much on the technical aspect of the ENS. I think what we are here for, although I'm sure that there will be some issues that will get into the technical aspects of the ENS, especially since Dr. Samir Mathur, who is the architect behind, I think, the development of this ENS is here. And I have one or two questions that I'm going to pose to him. But typically, I think most of the effort is more towards how do we do the implementation of ENS in the Indian housing sector. And within the Indian housing sector, we are really looking forward to see how the affordable housing can benefit from the ENS code document that has been developed. So I think that is the most important thing that we are looking, and I think all the panelists will be able to provide their perspective. So some people will, I'm sure they will come from the government perspective. Some people will come from the private sector perspective. Some people may come from more a practitioner perspective or a tools perspective. And I think some of you may want to actually talk a little bit more on the technical side of things. Before I start, I think maybe the three pieces you have seen that what were the objectives. I think what we are looking to do in the second phase, and we will be listening very carefully to, I think, what your thoughts are in terms of how you are going to share your experience with us. So as you make your interventions, I'll request you to highlight issues that are focused on implementation of ENS from your perspective. And if you can cover also the Pmi use scheme and what is the applicability. You saw some of, I think, slides cover that. And we know that, I think, some of the sub schemes within that, especially the affordable housing program, lends itself well to that. But we also realize that there is barely 2 years remaining, I think, in the conclusion of the Pmi use scheme. So if you can shed some of your thought process, especially I will request Mr. Harpal Dave and also I think Dr. Rajsekhar to focus on that. I think that would be very, very helpful for the audience and for our team as well. Also, one of the other issues that I want all of you to look at is that there has been this constant tug of war or discussion whether I think ENS should focus on energy conservation, energy savings, or whether it should be more focused on thermal comfort. And I think I would like people to just reflect on that a little bit from your vantage point, what you think about that. And then I think in terms of the design, policy, technology, financing, and capacity of the key stakeholders involved in the ENS implementation. So what's your take on that? I think because all these people are fairly important in this context. I'm going to actually use a quote to kick this thing off. And as we share our worldview, there is a quote that I want to say is we all want the complicated world that we live in to make sense. So we tell stories to fill in the gaps, what are effectively blind spots for us. And I think that's the mindset that I think AEEE has here, that we know very little, I think, in terms of how the ENS implementation is going to pan out. We have some experiences that we can learn. We have some great, I think, experience in the form of all the panelists. And I would really want that what kind of stories you want to share, I think is something that I will be very interested in. Mr. Harpal Dave, I would start with you, sir. You belong to Town and Country Planning Organization. And I think you have a vantage point of not just, I think, a lot of us are architects and engineers, but you are a planner. And I think as a planner, I feel planner have a really important role to play in India, and especially I think on the topic that we are discussing right now. So without further ado, I would request you to share your perspective. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My greetings to all my co-panelists and the audience of this webinar. So I think the most important aspect when we speak about the affordable housing is how does the the ULB consider this the Eco Niwas parameters into the affordable housing parameters. Now we in many of the states we have put in place this online building plan approval system. What in Gujarat they call ODPS, Online Development Permit System. The ODPS basically, it has all the building bylaws and the development control regulations built into the system, and the ODPS reads the building plans and grants the building plan sanction. The engineer or the person who is looking at running the system from the other side, they grant the building sanction by looking if it is compliant to the design norms or no, the building bylaws and the development control regulations. What happens, the ULB or the UDA, whichever is the granting authority in the case, it normally has all the the bylaws for the setbacks, for the building height, the size of the window, fenestrations, and other aspects. But we do not have the energy conservation parameters as one of the guiding the bylaws or as one of the parameters for building plan sanction. Recently, we have prepared the model building bylaws. We have circulated to the states. Many of the states have adopted the green building principles of the building bylaws. So it includes about the rainwater harvesting, wastewater recycling, waste management, the use of solar energy for creating thermal comfort and for the lighting and other aspects. But the kind of material we are using for the building envelope or the building envelope design, the orientation of the building, how would that add to the heating or cooling load of the building? Heating load mostly in the case of India. The cooling load, how do you cool the building by whatever heat is gained? So we, as of now, in the building plan approval system, do not measure these parameters as of now. This is possible. Presently, the online permit system uses something called the .dwg file, the AutoCAD file, or even open source file they can read, but it's a 2D drawing. If we convert this into a 3D drawing, if the building plan approval system accepts 3D, which Mumbai is beginning in some time, they will be accepting 3D building drawings as a part of their. If we specify the building material, we specify the coordinates, and of course the orientation of the building, then it will be easy to assess the net gain, the heat gain of the building, and how much energy would be required to, along with the orientation, if we can give the material specification. This is something which is required, to make best use of the guidelines. And then comes the important part of the capacity building of the people who are running the corporation, the town planners and the architects and the engineers who grant the building plan sanction. They would be required to train how to look at a building which is low energy consumption, low on the energy consumption, and then we'll need to provide something by which we can provide actual economic gains to the builders and developers who are supporting such buildings. Maybe some sort of TDR for people who promote such buildings, and other such incentives which can actually add to the financial gains. So yeah, that's it from my side in the first phase.
Thank you, Harpalji. I think what I gathered from your interventions, maybe I think you covered some ground, but maybe two things that you are saying that while in the course of approving the designs, there are a lot of parameters that your department is already, I think, quite familiar with. The energy conservation criteria, I think, is something that you look forward to, and that is the entire purpose of ENS. So that is, I believe, is a welcome move. The second piece that you are also mentioning is that you are looking forward to some capacity building, because sometimes these things are also technical, and it may take some time for the government people or the architects and others who are working with your department and the ministry to become familiar with these things. So I'm sure that some of these things will get covered. I am going to request my friend and I think the architect, Dr. Sameer Mathal, to come in at this point of time. I think Sameer, I will use another code, which I think in some ways reflect the essence behind the ENS development process. And this is a quote that I am fond of, which says, to simplify before you understand the details is ignorance, and to simplify after you understand the details is genius. And this is by James Clear. And I have always said that I think the way ENS has been developed, I think it's a very simple code, and its beauty relies, I think, in its simplicity. And if we compare this with ECBC, which is a much more complex, I think, document. So I want you to address, I think, what was the idea behind, I think, the development of this simple code. And when you hear, I think, Mr. Harpal Dave talk about, I think, giving you the technical, or hoping that a document provides the technical criteria, what is your sense, I think, how easily or how best this can be addressed? So we would like to hear from the horse's mouth. So Samir, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Satish, and thank you, AEEE and GBPN for giving this opportunity. Yeah, and I have gone through the report, so I think it has come out very well. It has documented a lot of things which are sort of needed to build a sort of next steps. So I think that documentation has happened very well. Now, I think the idea, like when this code was being developed from Bureau of Energy Efficiency, also was that the code should be very simple, and one of the aims was that the main code document should not exceed 8 to 10 pages. Okay, it can have annexures. So knowing that, like while say ECBC was for larger commercial buildings, and those projects have a lot of technical capacities available even for designing and for checking the compliance. For residential buildings, those capacities are going to be much less. So the idea was to have a simple code and just focus on certain basics. And it was thought that the building envelope, if we are able to tackle first building envelope, then the other, say, services and other equipments can be tackled later on. So I think I would say simplicity, and we hope that the ease of implementation was sort of central point for the philosophy for the development of the code. Now coming to Mr. Dave's, and I am very sort of excited, like, because he talked about the online system for approval. And Mr. Dave, I would like to tell you that already a tool exists in which it is possible to check compliance with ENS. So there is an online tool which is there. And essentially, so what can happen is, in your system of online approval, this so some of the so a report is automatically generated from the tool, which will check the compliance and which can go as an input to your the approval process. And this is something like the states where we are working in, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh, we had some discussion on this. So I think that tool is there, and we would be very happy to essentially discuss with you how to take it forward. The other thing is that if it is possible that in the building bylaws, which you have released in 2016, if some of these now ENS compliant things can be integrated in that. I know that model building bylaw is a long process, but if an amendment is possible, I think that will greatly help us when we work in states. Yeah, and as AEEE team has rightly suggested that, okay, what there are 4 parameters which needs to be included, and if with you, like, you can see that in your code where those things are going to come, I think then that will help the states. So Satish, I will just pick on 1 or 2 things. Others that I think that apart from the data on energy performance in housing, I think we also require much more data on thermal comfort. Actually, like, what are the indoor temperatures and what is happening? Because if we have to bring that. Another point which I would say that on one hand, the regulations, working on regulatory side is important, but how do we create awareness and demand from the end users? I think that's where we have till now done very little, because once they start demanding, then the situation will change. Then there are some other aspects like I think in a ENS implementation, training of contractors or the people who really construct the buildings is much more important than it was, say, in case of ECBC, where all the training was focused only on designers. But here I think that is going to be the key. And I will just mention at the end that I think the implementation is not so difficult. We have examples of working with Rajkot Municipal Corporation, where almost seamlessly they were able to integrate ENS and construct almost 1,200 houses in a project, and similarly, I think there is a case in Lucknow Development Authority. And now, very interestingly, and I will maybe come to it later, is on the incremental housing, where Andhra Pradesh is constructing 3 million houses, and we have been working with them, where the model house has been checked for ENS compliance. And so in a sense, like for a small house, how it can be done. And there are now plans to take up that work on a larger scale with Andhra Pradesh. So with this, I will end my first sort of comments.
Thank you, Sameer, and thank you for, I think, sharing both the simplicity as well as the ease of implementation, talking about the online tool that is available that can check for ENS compliance, the importance of modifying the model building bylaws, because some of these things we know that I think anytime any entity wants to work at the ULB level, they would first question they would ask that what is the situation at the central government level, at the parent ministry. Then they will ask that I think he has our state adopted, I think ENS, or they have cleared it for implementation. And if we try to go around that and jump and straight away try to look for implementation, we can do pilot projects. I think those are also good, but I think we will really struggle to scale it up quickly unless we have checked the boxes on what needs to be done. So I think some of the things that you are saying, Sameer, is really critical, I think, in terms of executing these projects. I will come to Dr. Raj Sekhar. And Dr. Raj Sekhar, you are the chair of the Urban Resilience Unit and heading the Climate Change Center for Cities. And we know that I think when we talk about climate change or resiliency, we also talk about, I think, the built environment. We also talk about, I think, the heat waves and other things that is expected. And the most vulnerable people are going to be the people who are going to be living in these affordable homes. So while AEEE is also working with some of these things, my sense is that how do you really define risk? Because a lot of the things that, in my opinion, what NIUA and especially I think your team is doing is trying to mitigate risk. And one definition of risk can be that risk is what's left over when you think you have thought of everything, right? So, but we can't think of everything, right? So our, I think, thought process or our, I think, how we perceive risk is really determined by our own experiences, or I think the group that you constitute. So in that sense, where do you see ENS fitting into this scheme of things? And is it really a powerful tool, especially in a warming world and in a situation where a lot of people in India don't have proper housing? How do you see these things coming together? I think from an NIUA perspective, which is also a think tank for Mahua and others. So we are very keen to hear your thoughts on this. We can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Thank you, Dr. Satish.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Regarding the risk, what you're talking about is absolutely right. You know, in India, most people consider risk. I mean, they don't even consider wearing a helmet as not wearing a helmet as a risky thing. Their appetite to take risk is quite high. And when it comes to people who are in a certain segment of the population, it is not that their appetite to take risk is high. It is just that they don't have another option, because the investing towards non-risky measures is going to be much more than their current livelihood. So we do understand the problem, and we should also appreciate the complexity in urban areas, because right now we have been looking at sectors, we have been looking at departments in a very isolated and siloed manner, but that's not how cities function. It is systems coming together and networks coming together, either it is communication, water supply, sewage, drainage, and things like that. It is how do we function within this network system, and how do we not only at this looking at one thing, but also looking at things collectively at a master planning level. So within the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and currently as the head of the Climate Center for Cities, which was recently launched by the minister 3 months back. So I can indicate what we are doing within it and how it links to the ENS, and what you are all thinking about implementing. I just want to pick up on 2 points, which I'm sorry I joined late, but I did hear Dr. Samir Mittal talk about, how do we create awareness, and also Mr. Harpalji, he did talk about, national level programs and plans. So I'm going to talk a bit about the national level framework, if that's all right, and then I'll dovetail into what cities can do and how cities are going to benefit, and what 5 years down the line, how things are going to transform, especially with respect to the building sector and the role ENS can play. So just coming to the point, the Climate Smart City Assessment Framework was launched a year back, but this year we have launched the revised Climate Smart City Assessment Framework, which comprises of 28 indicators. And one of the thematic area is energy and buildings. So that's where it is highly relevant to not only talk about risk in other things, but also talk about climate resilient growth, and for that, energy and buildings play a very vital role. So from that perspective, we are not talking only about today's risk, we are talking about future risks, and for which this thematic area is quite significant. I'm not going to talk about the other 4 thematic areas. It has urban planning, to give you a broad overview. It has water supply, it has waste, and it also has mobility and air quality. But coming down into energy and green buildings, or energy and buildings, there are 2 indicators which have been brought in, and one is on adoption of such technology within buildings to save energy and to conserve energy, and the second one is promotion of how much the city is promoting it, or how much the city is, when we say promoting it, I'm not talking about they putting out a banner, but how are they enabling certain standards, how are they welcoming certain measures. And ENS is one of the 4 measures which we have indicated that they have to be brought into play. And the second one, in terms of the implementation, we have also made sure that all the buildings, either they have to be green building certified or ENS certified, which has to be recorded and reported on an annual basis. So this framework is something which we started last year. We had a benchmarking done, and we are going to take it forward over the next 5 to 10 years. So what we are going to do is, we started with 100 cities, and this year we are doing 139 cities, and we are targeting over 2025 we will reach around 500 plus cities, which includes current smart cities and Amrut cities. So what's going to transform? Cities are going to listen when experts like you are going to talk to them, because that is one of the indicators where they are going to be rated and they are going to be monitored on an annual basis. To promote that, starting certain simple things like starting an energy efficiency cell, or starting an energy efficiency committee, because within the municipal corporation, usually you don't have the kind of experts and resource people. How did we start to include ENS before even it was brought into the mainstream? Because we brought in 60 experts to sit together and debate on all these thematic areas. Unfortunately, the municipal corporation doesn't have the time and effort to do that. So by us facilitating it, the first and foremost thing we are recommending them to do is form an energy efficiency committee or energy building cell, which can guide them in the process. 2, take care of these ENS measures and standards which are already in place. They don't have to reinvent the standards. How much of it they are bringing it into their building bylaws? How much of it they are adopting it within the buildings which municipal corporation is constructing and promoting? So that itself gives a big push, going from pilot, because even when you look in terms of the private sector and others, the amount of money which municipal corporation and cities are investing towards building is much, much larger than many of these pilot projects which takes place in a sporadic moment. And like, some of you know that, the EWS housing is something which the government is very, pro, and it's going to be promoted not only this year, it's going to be promoted no matter which, what happens over the next 3 to 5 years, because that is the need of the hour. People are still staying in, a high risk environment, where we are not only talking about high risk environment in terms of floods and cyclones, but we are talking also in terms of the health concerns. People having engineered structure, or people staying in non-engineered structure, non-engineered systems also accompany that, especially sewage, water supply and sanitation. So until unless we move them towards an engineered system, things are not going to change. So in the larger perspective, what we are trying to do is trying to push this cities adopt some of the component of these frameworks. Of course, there could be a larger debate why for energy and green buildings you have limited with 2 indicators and not brought in another 10 indicators. But this is a simple push to promote the technology. We are not, we at this present moment, we want to keep monitoring it, how each city is progressing on an annual basis. And that's how you get the push. And then we can, based on the data, we can actually come up with mechanism to also dovetail some of the investments which are going to be planned in the next coming years. Probably Smart City 2.0 may have more around housing because many of the cities are performing bad. Or probably we will have more donors and foundations and experts targeted towards cities, because that is the area where they lack the technical expertise. Whatsoever it is, we are now tracking the cities, we are now monitoring what they are doing. We have a benchmark. This year we are going to do the second assessment. But I see quite a good opportunity for all these things to come into a major play over the next 3 years. With that, I stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rajsekhar. Very, very, I think quite fascinating to hear, I think your views on risk, and also I think what the Climate Smart City framework is doing in terms of incorporating some of the building specific indicators that will allow, I think, some of these policies like ENS or ECBC to be implemented at the city level, which we have thought there has been a gap and that needs to be pushed. So I think that's very, very, I think, comforting to hear. AEEE is also part of the Climate Smart City framework. We also have, I think, some ideas where we would like some of these indicators to be expanded and maybe the numbers to be increased as well. So we will work with you, sir, I think, as we look at the next versions of this framework. So so next I am going to come to Dr. Sunita Purushottam. And Sunita, you are representing, I think you are a physicist by training. You are also with a private sector, one of the very, I think, highly rated private sector company that is that scores very big on sustainability, not just in India, but globally. And so it is not surprising that I think Mahindra Life Spaces developers is really embracing some of these things. We are also very happy to see you participate on the Solar Decathlon India initiative. I'm sure Prasad is going to talk a little bit about that and ENS role there. But in terms of, I think, what you have heard is, I think, what the government has been trying to do. But we know that I think the housing sector is a pretty large sector. And if we have to achieve scale, speed, and I think the cost effectiveness, then private sector's role becomes absolutely critical, I think, in terms of delivering the large numbers that we are literally talking about. So what story do you want to share, or what experiences do you want to share with us that can actually allow us to reflect a little bit in terms of what are the challenges, I think what kind of issues that we are likely to face as I think we scale up. I mean, ENS is barely 2 years old. I think I go to ECBC, which is close to 15 years old now, I think, or 13, 14 years old. And I definitely don't want ENS to suffer the same fate of ECBC, where I think it has been delayed extensively. So I think I'm very, very curious and very interested to hear what your thoughts are. Mostly, I think, from the private sector perspective, but also looking from this whole building physics perspective of doing the right things in a climate change dominated world where we are going to be facing increasing risks, and the people who are going to be most vulnerable are these poor people who are going to be living in affordable housing. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I must say that, while we are having a discussion which is very technical, the more we are able to share this. Am I audible? I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
So the more we are able to share with, I would say let's aim to share with the entire country and whoever is aspiring to buy a home, what a home should be like. And a home should be one which is compliant with Eco Niwas Samhita. That is the message that has to go out. And I personally believe that there's only one person who can do that. Uh, it's our prime minister, and it is that kind of message, because taking the risk angle ahead, we are very vulnerable, and that's not apparent to the common man, or even to a common, say, people who are living in medium premium segment homes. They are really not keyed into the idea of climate change or how it is going to impact, because honestly speaking, the impact is not equitable, and that inequitable distribution of impact is going to be on people who are of the who will be part of the affordable housing segment. So the climate change risk is that by 2070, 3 billion people will live in extreme heat, and this there is a rising demand in hot countries on ACs. And AC also is a aspirational, like you want your first car, AC is also aspirational. And that's where we are getting into when we are making these homes for the affordable and the EWS segment. That now I have a concrete structure and I have a home which is respectable, and but it's not thermally comfortable. But I don't know that it is not thermally comfortable till I go and live there, right? And I have this house and I am not comfortable within it when I start living there, and I would then want AC, and this will add on to the burden of our increasing the climate risk. And climate risk will not pan out in the form of the skies falling in one day. It is happening over a period of time, and we are seeing the experiencing it on a daily basis, and majority of it will combined with the biodiversity and ecosystem collapse, resulting in health related aspects, and these aspects will pan out in variety of disease and public health issues, which will impact the people who are not protected enough and don't have the mechanism, and living in homes which are of the affordable, and also those who really don't have homes. So the impact is inequitable, and therefore from the built environment and the scaling perspective, the code cannot be voluntary at all. It is not a code which can be voluntary. And if you are to look at a built environment where 2/3 of India is not built, what we want, what we aspire for by 2030, we cannot have a code which is left out there, that builders can take up and comply to, or use it as a competitive advantage. That is not, cannot happen. And for that reason, we'll have to look at the technology of how we are building the concrete homes, what kind of materials we are using, what kind of projection factors we are using. We don't, in Pune, if you go, you will find apartments being made without any chhajja, and with huge walls, windows, and that there is no regulation on what should be a wall to window ratio. And so we are not living in Europe. We are living in a country which is getting hotter by the day. And if we do not have codes which are mandated at to some level, we will not achieve what we want to achieve, because we actually have undertaken entire life cycle inventory of GHG emissions. 92% of our emissions is use phase, that is when the flat is handed over. Construction phase and the whatever we are doing is around materials, and construction phase is around 8%, and remaining a small percentage is our offices, corporate offices, which we can go towards net zero and so on, right? But what about the homes that we are making, which comprise of 92% of our emissions, right, of the total inventory that we have? So we will have to get in a mechanism where the entire emissions during the use phase is factored in through a compliance to a code. And to the point that Dr. Rajshekhar made, it can't be a either or. It can't be a green building certification or a ENS. It has to be ENS, because ENS looks at the energy efficiency in buildings in a deeper way. You can actually not go in for all the criteria in a green building and not comply to ENS. So I'm just bringing it out that it can't be a green building certification, because green building certification, the thoroughness around ENS is higher. Or you have to do energy simulation models. You will have to do some simulation modeling to get there, and all of that should be part of your getting your occupancy certificate and adhere to the local bylaws. So till it is not there in the bylaws, we will be struggling with the code. So that's my 2 cents on this. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Huh.
Yeah, muted. Yeah, muted. It
Oh,
seems.
sorry about that. I'm sorry. So thanks, Anita, for that intervention and making a strong case for making ENS mandatory. We know that it's in the voluntary phase, and we do realize, I think, that given the urgency, this needs to be fast-tracked. And also, the point that you are making, that I think as part of any green building certification program, if we are looking at energy efficiency, any code compliance has to be a prerequisite. So there is just no two ways around that. So I'm going to come to my dear friend again, Prasad Vaidya. Prasad, in his bio, has also written, I think, a project that we did about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, when we developed a compliance tool for ECBC. It was called Eco Niwas. Prasad was a partner in crime. Right now, we are doing this Solar Decathlon India project, where we are looking at different building types, but some building type are also housing related. And Prasad also has the unique distinction of teaching this master's in building performance program at CEPT University. So I think he comes with a lot of experience. He can wear different hats. He's also acting as a special advisor to the team that is working on the GBPN project at AEEE as well. So he's pretty clued in into, I think, the work that has happened and what is the steering in front of us. So Prasad, I don't know if you can turn your video on. If you can, I'll request you to do that. If not, maybe I think you can share some of your thoughts on this. And also, I think I personally believe that sometimes we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking that was used to create the problem. I mean, this is classical Albert Einstein quote, but I think when we are looking at, I think, a legacy of 40, 50 years, which has taken us, I think, to where we are. What is your take, I think, in terms of coming out with building energy code, climate smart city framework? We are trying to do so many things. What, in your opinion, are, I think, some of the things that you see working, and what kind of collaboration I believe is needed between different stakeholders to help solve the problem?
Thanks, Satish. I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm not visible because my camera isn't working. But yeah, hello to everyone. I'm happy to share my thoughts. I think that Sunita actually hit the nail on the head when she said that ENS has to be mandatory. And I want to sort of have my comments be circling around that idea of mandatory, ENS as a mandatory requirement. First of all, Satish, you asked, do we make is ENS related to thermal comfort or energy savings as a sort of is it this or that? And it's really not this or that. It's both. Without energy savings, if you don't do thermal comfort with energy savings, they're worthless. And if you do thermal comfort without getting energy savings, that also is worthless, given the fact that we're facing climate change. And for something that is as in our face with, yes, we are all frogs boiling in the well of climate change, but most of us have started to realize that, no, this is actually a huge problem that we are facing. ENS actually comes as a very, very simple tool for us to start doing something that is concrete. And it can be made mandatory, and it can be eminently done so because it is simple. It is a very easy code to implement. It requires very basic calculations. It's not that different for doing ENS calculations than doing something like a FSI calculations, which we all do, and doing setback calculations and all of those things that are basically area based. ENS is not that different. Secondly, ENS gives us better thermal comfort because of the thermal performance of the building, and it's actually the OTTV, the overall thermal value is a measurement of how comfortable the building is going to be. And that is the elegance also of ENS, that it's not just focused on some EPI number of energy conservation, but it's also related directly to your thermal comfort. And that's something that relates to the people who are living in the building and their experience. So that for that one reason, it is simple. It's related to the thermal comfort of the people. Obviously, when you have good thermal comfort through your building envelope, you are able to reduce the number of hours that you would operate your air conditioning. You would actually be able to reduce the sizing of the air conditioning systems that you would put in your building. And that would be a huge thing, because that totally ties in to the National Cooling Action Plan or the India Cooling Action Plan, ICAP. And the fact that ENS will allow us to have less refrigerants in our environment is a big deal. I don't really see in negative that anybody could come with to oppose ENS being made mandatory. And because it is simple, all stakeholders can actually get behind implementing it and enforcing it very easily, much faster than many of the other measures that we would try to do. I'll talk about it from the perspective also of the experience that I've had with Solar Decathlon India. That the energy performance index, or the kilowatt hours per meter square per year, that's a pretty abstract concept that the ECBC, the commercial version of the code, has. But we use that as a way of measuring energy efficiency of buildings. And in the Solar Decathlon India's first deliverable, we asked the student teams, there's 75 of them from across India, and we asked them, can you tell us what you're targeting for your EPI? And these are students who have never been exposed to working with energy efficiency, at least most of them, energy efficiency in buildings. And to our surprise, almost all of them, maybe one or two, did not report on their EPI and did not report on EPIs that were actually reasonable, which to me was a huge surprise, because it is a very complex idea, an abstract idea to get to. But because we made it mandatory that your report will not be acceptable unless you put this number in, they went through all the technical research that's needed and reported the numbers. And that's the magic of making something mandatory, that people will comply because you're asking for it. And that allows the stakeholders to get behind it and do something that they might not normally be used to. The other thing that I see is that ENS ties to housing, and everybody lives in homes. And as Sunita mentioned, making it tied to your home and your performance of your home, or the label on your home, is a very good way of saying that that it is my right to get thermal comfort. It is my right to be able to live in a home that contributes towards not going through climate change and actually going in the other direction. And so it's something that the housing actually allows everybody, all Indians, to participate in this aspect, because it's housing. The other thing is that multifamily housing is of huge interest in architecture and engineering colleges. So in Solar Decathlon India, the maximum number of registrants that we got were for the multifamily housing division. And what we found out while talking to various academic professors who are teaching in these colleges is that the third and the fourth year, depending on which the colleges, are typically studio problems, design problems that are related to multifamily housing. And that gives us a huge opportunity to allow students to familiarize themselves with ENS if we can bring it into the curriculum. So I think there are a lot of things that are in place to make this happen, and maybe all we need is, like Sunita said, we need the PM to say, let's do this, guys. That's it from me.
Hey, thanks a lot, Prasad. I was thinking of a follow-up question, but I think all the interventions have been excellent, and people are just sharing from their vantage point what they think about ENS and how ENS can actually be implemented. We still feel that I think the execution and implementation, even though ENS is far more simpler, as everybody is explaining, I think it still remains a pretty big challenge in front of us, and working with the states and others is going to be a humongous task. So we need, I think, people and organizations and others to come and work, I think, on different aspects in different cities, different states, to help build the capacity, as I think Mr. Harpal Dave was saying, and also I think how we can minimize the risk. What I'm going to do now is that we have received some questions from some of the audience. So rather than me continuing to sort of like frame the questions, I'm going to go to some of those questions that has come to me. So my first question, and this is for you, Mr. Dave, and I'm combining two questions in one so that you can respond to them together. So the first question is that suppose hypothetically, if Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs or somebody, they start to offer incentives to help people comply with the code. That itself is a little bit of a, I think, a controversial idea, that should you give incentive for people for doing something as basic as code compliance. But hypothetically, if you have to offer incentives, would you offer it after reviewing design, or should it only be disbursed after construction is in advanced stage and you have kind of verified, I think, how the final product may look like? So this is one question. The second question, which is kind of related, is that a lot of the developers and the people who build multifamily housing, they are sometimes tired of getting dozens of clearances from multiple authorities. I think even when we try to do a single window clearance, it is a Herculean task because one needs to go through a lot of paperwork. Is there a possibility that energy efficiency, I think, compliance can be added to that single window clearance, so that it is not coming as an added, I think, burden, but it can be bundled with the X number of things that people have to do anyway? So over to you, sir.
Yeah, I think both the questions are quite relevant. Coming to the first one about the economic incentives, I would rather welcome any idea which provides any economic incentive to an individual or a builder or a developer who is planning to, who is attempting to adopt this Eco Niwas Samhita in its full in the spirit and letter. And coming to the city of Ahmedabad, where the study, the report which was just released, city of Ahmedabad, they are quite mercantile in their outlook, and the way they are quite calculative about what action requires how much amount of investment and what are the returns they are getting in, what are the kind of financial returns. I would go a step ahead, and what Dr. Maithil mentioned before a while, there is a tool to calculate if the building is complying to the Eco Niwas Samhita or no. If we can add to that tool how much kilowatt hour of energy is being saved by this sort of design interventions, what is the per annum saving in terms of the energy bill, how much can we save this in the building plan approval system. We can put an online calculator. We do it for the development charges and other costs. What is the cost of the building for all these things put together? If we can calculate how much it is saved for 1 year, for 5 years, if this life cycle of the building is 25 to 30 years, how much is the life cycle savings of the building by doing this many design changes? And then it adds to the saving, and over and above, if we can give some more incentive, maybe some rebate in the development charges or something, I'm fully for that. It's welcome suggestion, nothing wrong in that. And it would, the city as a whole would start benefiting by having reduced number of energy requirement for the city as a whole. Many of the European cities are already speaking about the what they call carbon neutral cities. So maybe this would add, it was taken in this direction. So completely for that, wonderful suggestion. The second question, yes, the ENS parameters can very well be embedded into the online building plan approval system. It's only about adding those many more checkpoints about the materials and the design of the building. It's not a very big deal. Just like we have the compliances for fire safety, for other water recycling, for the water supply and other things. This is one of the added parameters. It can be easily done, and so that would rather, it is rather to be integrated in the OBPS system itself rather than going for an additional certificate. In Ahmedabad presently, if you have a green building, you can get some of the incentives from the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. But for that, you have to get a GRIHA certified green building. So you have to apply to GRIHA and get the certificate, which is an added process because GRIHA is not integrated. Same with Kolkata. In Kolkata also, if you have a GRIHA rated building, you have some, incentives in the development charges. But the best thing is to integrate the system in one single place in the single window, and that's doable.
Thank you, Mr. Dave. I have a bunch of questions coming in, so maybe I'll try to combine some of these questions. So the next question, I am directing it to Samir. So Samir, there is a question where people are trying to ask that how does the RETV value translate to energy savings and thermal comfort? And they are asking that what does 15 watt per square meter, I think he really tell us. And I guess it's a hard question to answer, but I thought, and I think a related question also is, which is that, has there been any study, and I know that you folks have done some technical study on the capital cost impact of complying with ENS? And this is a question that came up within our team, Samir, when we were, and I was asking that, give and take, we have about 275 million households in India, existing household. If you look at the shortage, I think it's about, say, 20 million homes that we are talking about, which is the gap that is being talked about. So it's just 10% or less than 10% of the existing housing stock that is already existing in the country. So I think my larger question, I think, Samir, to you is that, are we going to be looking at RETV application for the new construction? Or I know that we have talked a little bit about it in the past, but there has to be a way of improving the existing stock and enhancing their building envelope and enhancing the thermal comfort. But that's a much more challenging problem in terms of execution. So maybe I think you can try to cover some of these things which are sort of related. So over to you, Samir. 。
Thank you, Dr. Maithil. So, Dr. Maithil, I think, you know, the, 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 the,
Yeah, so Satish, regarding RETV, essentially what RETV is giving you is the sort of average heat gains over the cooling period. Like, so we say that, okay, if suppose in a certain climate, we have the 7 months or 6 months, which is considered as the hotter period of the time, what is the average heat gain? And if you, so there is a supplementary sort of information available with Eco Niwas Samhita, where there is a correlation directly between the RETV and how much cooling energy you require. Okay, so there is a correlation. So if suppose it is 15 watts per meter square, then say in a place like Bombay, the cooling energy requirement would be, the annual cooling requirement would be how much. So that is there.
And this is
So
climate dependent, right?
Yes, it is climate dependent. Yes, it is climate dependent. So that information is there. I think, so if I look at it, that is not so much available in public domain. So I think that we should, as Mr. Dave also said, that if we can tell people how much energy it will save. So I think similarly, there is also calculation for how much degree discomfort hours reduction will be there. That means for how many, so that also is there, because all those calculations were done. So I think the message to us is that how in simple words we are able to convey to it, a person will not be able to understand what is this RETV, but I think we have to translate it to that. So I take that as a message from this, and that is easily doable, and we will try to do that. Now coming to the capital cost, if you really look at what ENS is essentially saying, that okay, your wall has to be constructed using a certain material, the window size should not be excessively large, you should have some basic shading. So there are only two elements. So generally, in many cases, what we have seen, the ENS compliance can be done at no additional cost. Okay, there are two problems areas which I would like to highlight, and we are also working with Dr. Sunita Purushottam. So one area is that monolithic concrete construction becoming sort of mainstream construction technology, particularly in say 15 stories and above housing. Now that is if suppose you now, so we are talking of 125, 150 millimeter concrete walls, and that in Western and Southern India, many of the developers, that has become the mainstream thing. Now, if suppose you have to do any treatment, then that has additional cost. So that is one problem area. Otherwise, if you're constructing using bricks and blocks, in most of the cases, by appropriately choosing the block, whether it is AC block or even certain type of bricks or hollow bricks, and even just by shading and windows, etc., you would be able to meet 15. 15 is not difficult. So one area is what do you do with monolithic concrete? The second is the roof insulation, because that's where the additional cost comes, and particularly in case of low-rise buildings, that becomes important. In a high-rise building, the cost of a roof is sort of divided across a much larger number of units, so that is not so much of a problem. But so apart from this, there is no cost increase. So I think cost is not so much of an issue. Existing buildings can be used, can be analyzed using the tool, and that also we have done for certain developers. And there are some areas, like I would say, improving the shading, the external shading is one which is easily possible. Roof treatment, whether using certain type of paint or insulation, is another thing which is possible. Treatment of wall is a difficult thing. So in retrofitting, there are few things which can be done, particularly if the house is not properly oriented and you have glazed surfaces, then shading can be improved, and roof treatment can be done, which can help. And if suppose they are going for retrofitting of windows, then there are many other options. So I will stop there.
Okay. Okay.
So this, can I add to this a little bit?
Yeah, please go ahead, Prasad.
Yeah. So I, Sami, thanks for stating that. But it is really true that getting to this level of energy efficiency that we're talking about in ENS is not that big of a cost addition. In fact, it can be done at the same cost as a normal building, and most projects are able to bear this level of cost increase or cost fluctuation when the cost of cement or steel simply goes up and down. And so the fact that we are talking about this, 1% cost of the total project as some kind of a barrier for getting ENS implemented just seems to be sort of, a question that's posed to start discussion in a different direction, as is the way I kind of think about it. When it's one thing to be able to say that we are going to make this code mandatory. It's another thing to say what is it that we will do if it is not being implemented properly. And I think those are the things that actually need discussion, because if we are talking about any kind of a policy being put in place, be it driving on the left-hand side of the road or stopping when there is a red light, unless there's somebody looking at you and saying you're not doing the correct thing, people don't do the right thing. The enforcement and the review work and the policing, if you want to call it that, has to be there. And to me, it seems like the real question here is to make ENS, because the market is so big, there are so many different building units being built. The question really is, if we want to do on-scale implementation of this, is there a way to use technology to be able to bring this into, to make it easy? As soon as we started putting in traffic cams at signals, people started stopping at the signals. Otherwise, you'd see the creep happening at traffic lights, right? Every time the countdown starts, people start moving through the traffic light. But as soon as the cameras came in, the level of compliance increased. And maybe the question really to ask is, if we want to do this by 2030 or even before that, what is the technological angle that we can take on making the implementation and enforcement really scaled and possible, rather than focusing on cost?
Yeah. Thanks, Prasad. So I have just a couple of other questions before we will go into the wrap-up mode. So the next question is for Sunita Yu. There's a question where people are asking, and this is probably in the context of, I think, all the discussions that are happening. You don't have to put your Mahindra hat on, but this is more from the general developer community. If there is a push to make ENS mandatory, the big, I think, a pushback sometimes that comes is that the cost is going to increase. Where is the demand? We are not going to recover. So we are hearing that may not be the case. Yes, there could be a little bit of learning, but that can be addressed. So do you see that the developer community is going to be on board or fully supportive if the government wants to actually move forward with a mandatory implementation of ENS? Or if you think that it could be a tricky thing, what suggestions do you have? How, I think, different states, because this will come under the ambit of different states. So how should they go about doing this?
So basically, it could go in either direction unless we take all developers into confidence, walk them through what is in it for them, along with incentives perhaps, which Mr. Dave mentioned, like for the green building adoption, certification adoption. We will have to get them on board. So that onboarding process is very important, because there are lots of different perspectives of selling a home. Right, and the people who sell the homes do not necessarily have environmental people's hats on, right? And therefore the builder community is taking a lot of feedback from the market. What is the home or the dream home that I want? I want a spacious home. I may not be able to afford it, so my affordable home should have longer windows, and that's one of the major barriers, right? Bigger windows, which I'm seeing as a huge shift in the Indian people's thought process. We are in a hot country and we want big windows. That increases the heat gain. window treatments and so on. So the builder community has to be on board, and at the same time, the barrier for the builder community to be able to sell out is to cater to the market sentiment. So where is the market sentiment coming from? And therefore, what I mentioned was we need to reach out to every Indian wanting to buy a home. What should be a home, and what should it look like, and what kind of home should you be buying? So until that is there, the pushback from the builder community could be there, because they are catering to the market sentiment. They are catering to those hundreds of developers and competitors who are making similar homes in different parts of the country, which actually didn't have, in the olden times, cultural similarity in homes, because a home in Goa looks very different from a home in Nagpur, where there is so much heat and where there is so much rain. So when homes start looking similar, and you're catering to the sentiments of all the people aspiring to buy the home, we need to actually get down. I mean, it's a long drawn battle, I would say. So whether the builder community will come on board depends on whether every citizen wanting a home changes his viewpoint. And of course, that's therefore a long drawn battle, and therefore it has to come in from the a person
Okay.
of the stature of our Prime Minister.
All right. Thank you, Sunita. My last question is directed to Dr. Rajsekhar. Dr. Rajsekhar, you have heard, I think all of us are passionate about, I think, energy efficiency and thermal comfort. And we think this is the most important job that anybody can do. And this is the most important issue that the country is facing. But I think the reality is different. We know that you talked about health, sanitation. I think so many things that I think comes before we start to think about energy and thermal comfort and climate change. So I think if from your perspective, I think since you are really in this chair of climate resilience, I'm sure that you must be dealing with a lot of these pushbacks that must be coming in your way. Prasad talked about that. I think the cost is not an issue. Sunita is making an argument that yes, it should be made mandatory. Pradhan Mantri Sahab should make it a priority. Also, I think Harpal Dave is saying that we really need to do this. So it looks like I think we are in heated agreement that something like this we should embrace and move forward. From your perspective, what are the maybe one or two things that is the immediate need or priority that will really allow us to make it a national movement and scale it up? I think the scaling is, I think we can do pilot projects, we can do 1 million square feet, but can we actually do like 20 million square meter? I think that's the question that I think we are grappling with.
Thank you, Dr. Satish, and thank you for all the panelists. I think it's been quite an informative discussion. Just to quickly respond to Dr. Sunita's comment on the Prime Minister making it as a national agenda, of course, it'll be very good for advertisement, but cities are state subjects. City bylaws cannot be controlled by any national government. Every national government, even though they come up with any kind of a scheme, they can come up with some kind of a promotion, which Mr. Harpalji did mention. Yes, one can come up with some kind of an incentive to people who are doing it within government project, not within private builders and other things. So cities are state subjects, and cities are the bylaws of each city is sometimes different given the geographical and the geoclimatic zones. But I like something which Dr. Sami did mention. Probably he didn't highlight it very well, but there are two things which was discussed by both him and Mr. Vaidya, which are very, very important for taking this initiative forward. One, how do we make people understand in a very easy way? You know, all these metrics and numbers and even energy, when you talk energy consumption in certain units, common people don't understand that. They understand their energy bill. They understand something which even Mr. Harpalji did say about Ahmedabad, how much they can save, you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the year. So I think just aligning to whatever is happening at a global level, even though standardizing it is going to be very difficult. But building on the point which Dr. Sunita did mention, that most of the buildings coming across the country look the same, I think you should standardize that by bringing in a simple metric of, for every 4-degree change, this is the amount of saving one will have. Because what I've realized is people in slums or even people in middle income housing or economically weaker segment housing, they are not really worried about the temperature going beyond 30 degrees or 34 degrees. They are still fine. They switch on the fan, and the aspiration, even if they buy an AC, they are not going to switch on the AC because they know what the bill they are going to get at the end of the month. But when the temperature reaches beyond a certain point, that 4-degree or 6-degree decrease is going to lead to a huge impact, not only in terms of their personal cost saving, but that is where most of the substations blow up, because they can't handle that extra energy consumption which is coming all of a sudden, because the temperature rises from 38 degrees to 42 degrees, and the amount of energy which is required to cool a space at 42 degrees is much more higher than one that is at 32 degrees. So bringing it into a simple metric of, for every 4-degree change, either geoclimatically, people are going to save this much on a monthly basis or in an annual. I think annual basis works very well because the amount also looks big, it looks considerable, and annual also works well because 6 months in the 6 months during a year, most of the places they either have monsoon or either they are experiencing winter, so where the energy consumption is not quite high. The second thing which I also think that the promotion, I mean, like I said earlier, the climate smart city assessment framework gives incentive to cities to adopt it, gives incentives to cities to promote it. Incentives are currently in terms of more funds in terms of government related programs, or more diversion of these donors coming in. But all said and done, what is really going to make the transformation is when schemes like Smart City 2.0 is going to come up. I think mandating those schemes, that everything, all buildings constructed within those schemes can be made ENS, is possible. That is something, a push which you can try to write to the central government and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and that is a push you will be able to influence. Last, the Smart City 1.0 was $30 billion investment, and the Smart City 2.0 is going to be double of that, which is 60 billion. So you can influence a $60 billion initiative across the country in one single go by mandating all projects coming within it into it. So these are two broad suggestions to the overall group to mainstream it, but I think it has been more of my learning than anything else. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Rajsekhar. I wish we could continue in this fashion, but we have to be mindful of the time. I see some more questions and comments, I think, coming in from people, and we still have close to 60 people. So it has been a very, I think, a good discussion. I would like to take time to thank each one of you, Mr. Harpal Dave, Dr. Rajsekhar, Dr. Sameer Mathal, Dr. Sunita Purushottamam, and Mr. Prasad Vadya for sharing your views. And I'm sure that not just the people, but even the AEEE team has taken notes, and we will be looking at your comments as well as some of the comments that has come in from the people who have been putting it in the chat box. So want to thank all the audience also for staying put, for sharing your comments, asking questions, and making it an enriching experience for all of us. So before I hand it back to Simrat for closing this out, I also want to thank the AEEE team, Simrat and Arzu and Bhairav, who have worked behind the scenes to make this webinar possible. So thank you, I think, to all of you, and back to you, Simrat.
Thank you, Dr. Satish. To wrap up, I would also like to extend my gratitude to all the panelists for taking out the time for today's discussion and for having a very stimulating discussion, which we will all listening to very closely. I would also extend my thanks to all the participants who tuned in for today's webinar. You can find the report on formulating a policy strategy for decarbonizing the building sector through facilitating the implementation of Eco Niwas Samhita and affordable housing on AEEE's website. We hope you all find it of interest, and please feel free to share your thoughts with us. Once again, thanks a lot, everybody, and have a very good evening.